Evan unlocked his front door and stepped inside, dragging his suitcase behind him. The trip had been long, exhausting, and all he wanted was the quiet familiarity of his home. He expected the soft creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, maybe a warm cup of coffee waiting for him. Instead, he was hit by noise, little voices squabbling, laughter and chatter that didn't belong, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving in his space like they owned it. His chest tightened and his hand froze on the doorknob. Something was wrong. The moment he opened the door wider, the truth slammed into him. Boxes were stacked against the walls, plastic bins overflowing with clothes and toys, bags lined up like soldiers in formation across his living room. It looked chaotic, messy, but worse than the mess was the sense of intrusion. His home wasn't just lived in, it had been claimed, and the claim was personal. At the bottom of the stairs stood his sister, Lila, holding a small backpack that didn't belong to anyone he knew. Her face froze the instant she saw him. The three kids clung to the railing above her, peeking nervously, their expressions a mixture of guilt and curiosity. For a moment, the room seemed to shrink, the air thick with tension. Evan didn't speak. He simply stared, trying to process what he was seeing. "My sister. Moving in?" His voice was quieter than he expected, but it carried the weight of disbelief. Lila attempted a smile, nervous and unconvincing. "Evan. Hey. You're back early." He took another step inside, looking around at the mess, at the evidence of a life forcibly merged with his own. "And you decided this was okay? To just move in? While I was gone?" Lila swallowed and looked down. I didn't know where else to go. I tried calling you, I swear." "You called once," Evan cut in sharply. "Once, and you knew I couldn't answer. That doesn't give you permission to turn my house into your home." His voice wavered, a strange mix of anger and hurt. Her lips pressed together, her eyes darting toward the kids who were now peeking from behind the stair railing. Evan's gaze followed, taking in their innocent but confused faces. His heart twisted. He had never been cruel, but this felt different. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was a violation of trust. He had built his life carefully, and now someone had walked in and rearranged it without his consent. Evan's mind raced. He thought of every reason this might have happened, every justification Lila might have for doing this, and none of them erased the feeling of betrayal that gnawed at him. She wasn't just a sister in need. In that moment, she was an intruder, claiming space that was unequivocally his. Lila's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. "Evan, we didn't mean to upset you. It's just..." She hesitated, searching for the words. "I had nowhere else to turn, and the kids. They needed a place to stay." Evan's jaw tightened. He knew she had struggled. He had always known. But there was a difference between asking for help and assuming it without permission. The line between desperation and entitlement had been crossed, and the weight of that crossed line pressed down on him like a physical force. He moved further into the living room, his eyes scanning every detail. The couch cushions were slightly shifted, his coffee table covered in toys he didn't recognize, a pile of children's clothes spilling out of a box that once held his important documents. The intrusion was total. Every corner of his home had been touched by someone else's presence, and every corner reminded him of his loss of control. Evan stopped and turned to Lila, his voice lower, almost a growl. "This isn't just about space. This is about respect. About trust. You didn't respect my home. You didn't respect me." Lila looked up, her eyes glossy but firm. "I understand that now. I really do. I thought I was doing what was best. For the kids." He shook his head, a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Best for them doesn't erase what you did. Best for you doesn't erase what you did. You crossed a line, Lila. You crossed a line I can't ignore. The children shuffled behind her, sensing the tension, unsure of how to act. Evan's heart softened for a moment. He wasn't cruel, and the kids had done nothing wrong. But his mind kept returning to the sense of violation, the anger that bubbled beneath his skin. How could someone so close disregard his boundaries so completely? For hours that evening, Evan moved carefully around his own home, cataloguing the changes, noting the things that had been altered, shifted, or claimed. Each discovery made the anger grow, a quiet, simmering fire in his chest. The realization dawned on him slowly, like a shadow creeping over a familiar landscape. This was deliberate. She hadn't simply wandered in. She had planned this, chosen this, and acted without hesitation. And as he watched Lila and the kids settle into what was once solely his space, that seed of anger began to take root. It wasn't just frustration or disappointment. It was a desire to make them understand, to make them feel the weight of the violation, to reclaim what had been taken from him. That night, Evan lay in his bed, unable to sleep. The quiet hum of the house was no longer comforting. It was tense, filled with the invisible weight of broken trust. He thought of all the ways he could respond, from confrontation to passive resistance. But every scenario circled back to the same bitter truth. He had been wronged, and now the question became how to respond. He thought of revenge, not violent, not cruel, but a way to make Lila understand the depth of the impact of her actions. He imagined small acts, subtle but precise, ways to reclaim control over the home she had invaded. The idea made him restless, alert, and dangerous in thought, though not in action. The fire burned quietly, and yet it refused to die down. In the shadows of that room, Evan realized he had entered a new mental space. Trust had been broken, and the only thing left to navigate was how far he was willing to go to restore it. He didn't know if it would end in confrontation, compromise, or quiet observation. All he knew was that the act of moving in without consent had created a rift, and a rift demanded attention. As the hours passed, Evan's anger blended with a strange fascination. He studied his sister, her mannerisms, the way she adjusted to the house as though it belonged to her. He observed the kids, their laughter a reminder that innocence could exist even amid betrayal. The contradiction gnawed at him. Could someone act with good intentions and cause deep harm at the same time? Could someone he loved be both vulnerable and reckless? By the time dawn crept through the windows, Evan had made a silent vow to himself. He would not let this act go unacknowledged. He would not let his home, his sanctuary, be taken for granted. Whether through confrontation, clever planning, or simply waiting, he would find a way to address the betrayal. And in that decision, he felt the first flicker of purpose amidst the hurt, a purpose that would drive him through the days ahead. Evan stepped into the kitchen, his eyes scanning the room that was now shared, observing the boxes, the toys, the signs of a life that had collided with his own. He realized then that this was only the beginning. The invasion was not just physical but emotional. Lila's presence had shifted the balance of his world, and the only way to restore it was to act, carefully, deliberately, and with the awareness that every move would have consequences. And so, the story of betrayal, anger, and the simmering desire for revenge began. The house that once offered peace was now a battleground of emotions. Every glance, every word, every movement carried weight. Evan had been wronged, and the need to respond was already growing inside him, quiet but insistent, promising that nothing would remain the same again. Evan spent the next few days moving through his own home as though he were navigating a battlefield. Every corner he turned, every shelf he passed, reminded him of the intrusion. Lila's kids ran through the halls, their laughter echoing in rooms that once belonged only to him. Toys spilled across the floor. Clothes hung over chairs. Boxes were stacked in corners, half unpacked. He could feel his patience thinning, fraying with each small disruption. The violation wasn't just physical. It gnawed at his sense of control, his order, his boundaries. He tried to act normal at first. He greeted Lila and the kids in the mornings, smiled politely during breakfast, and tried to suppress the anger that tightened his chest. But behind that polite facade, his mind raced with plans, strategies, and imagined confrontations. He replayed the moment he'd returned home, the sight of his living room overtaken, and the shock that had gripped him. He could almost see it in slow motion. The boxes, the kids' nervous eyes, Lila's attempt at a smile. It fueled something dark and sharp inside him. Every evening after Lila and the kids went to bed, Evan sat at his desk in the quiet of his home office. The house was silent except for the hum of the city outside. He pored over scenarios in his mind. Should he confront her directly? Make her feel the same anxiety and helplessness he had felt when he discovered the invasion? Or should he act subtly, sending small reminders of ownership, little signs that this house still belonged to him? He didn't want to be cruel to the children. They were innocent, unaware of the tension. But he wanted Lila to understand the weight of her choices. The anger simmered alongside a strange fascination. He watched Lila move through the house, adjusting to spaces that were once entirely his. She acted almost naturally, as if claiming the home was not only justified but necessary. She rearranged furniture, placed her children's items in spots he had never imagined, and somehow made it feel like the house had grown to accommodate them. Evan's emotions tangled. Part of him admired her ability to adapt, to survive, and part of him hated the audacity, the sheer boldness of it. At night, he would lie awake listening to the quiet footsteps of her children, imagining them tiptoeing through his rooms, laughing in whispers. Every sound amplified his internal conflict. He hated her, yet he also understood her. Layla wasn't a villain. She was a mother, desperate and cornered, doing what she felt she had to do to protect her children. But her actions had consequences, and Evan was determined to ensure she acknowledged them. He began small, subtle tests, probing her boundaries without revealing his full intentions. He moved a few of his items back to their original places, noting her reaction. Sometimes she noticed immediately, frowning in surprise, her voice sharp with confusion. "Evan, what are you doing?" she would ask, and he would reply simply, "Just tidying up." Other times, she ignored it, absorbed in her own routines, unaware of the silent resistance building against her. Each reaction taught him something, showing him where she felt entitled and where she felt vulnerable. Evan also experimented with silence. He refused to engage in casual conversation, spoke only when necessary, and made his presence in the house noticeable without being confrontational. Leela noticed. The tension in the air grew, subtle but unmistakable, like static before a storm. The children sensed it too, moving quietly around him, glancing at their mother for reassurance. Evan's strategy was working. The house was no longer just hers, not completely. He had begun to reclaim it, piece by piece, with his presence and his attention. But the more he acted, the more conflicted he felt. Each small victory brought a twinge of guilt. He didn't want to hurt them. The kids were innocent, full of curiosity and trust, and their laughter tugged at something in him that refused to be silenced. He found himself pausing in his actions, reconsidering each move, analyzing whether the satisfaction of asserting control was worth the risk of emotional harm. The moral battle inside him was fierce, the desire for revenge on one side, compassion on the other. Evan's inner struggle became a game of mental chess. He imagined confrontations where he would call Lila out for her audacity, spell out the depth of his frustration and anger, and make her understand the pain of the violation. In other scenarios, he imagined quietly manipulating situations to show her the weight of her actions without ever speaking a word, letting her feel the intrusion in reverse, through subtle reminders that the house was his domain. Each scenario played in his mind repeatedly, sharpening his focus and intensifying the conflict. The tension escalated when he discovered one morning that the children had entered his office while he was asleep. Papers were moved, his notes disturbed, and a cup of coffee he had left on the desk was spilled. Evan's temper flared. He felt the surge of anger, immediate and raw. His first instinct was to confront Lila, to demand answers, to make her feel the frustration he carried. But then he caught sight of the small faces peeking from the hallway, wide, innocent eyes full of fear and apology. The anger faltered, replaced by a heavy sense of responsibility. He couldn't hurt the children. The desire for revenge had to be focused, measured, and deliberate. He retreated to his own room and closed the door, breathing heavily. The plan for revenge needed to be precise, controlled, and psychologically sharp, not reckless. He couldn't allow his emotions to dictate the actions he was plotting. The house had become a battlefield, but it was a battlefield of patience, observation, and strategy. Every move, every glance, every conversation was now part of a larger calculation. Evan also began to reflect deeply on Lila's perspective. She was desperate, cornered, doing what she believed was right for her children. She didn't see herself as an invader or a trespasser. In her mind, she was providing safety and stability, securing a place where her children could thrive. Understanding her mindset complicated his anger. Could he fully blame someone acting out of love, even if misguided? This thought nagged at him constantly, a shadow over his desire for retribution. Days passed with small skirmishes, rearranged items, subtle stares, moments of tension in shared spaces. Evan noticed how Lila would pause when she realized he was observing, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she resumed her routines. He realized that even small adjustments in his behavior could unsettle her. The power of presence became apparent. He didn't need to speak harsh words or act overtly. Just existing with intent, awareness, and silent assertion began to shift the balance. Yet, even as he plotted, he couldn't ignore the pull of family ties. Lila's exhaustion, the children's reliance on her, the love he still carried for them. All of it complicated the equation. Revenge was tempting, intoxicating in thought, but it carried a risk. Acting too harshly could destroy relationships permanently, leaving regret in place of satisfaction. Evan felt the weight of the choice pressing down like a hand on his chest, reminding him that the battle wasn't just with Lila. It was with himself, with his morals, his patience, and his understanding of what justice truly meant. By the end of the week, Evan had reached a delicate equilibrium. He maintained his distance, asserted subtle control, and observed carefully. Every interaction was measured. He began documenting the intrusions mentally, noting which areas had been overtaken, which actions crossed boundaries, and which moments could be used to make his point later. The fire of anger was alive, but it was focused. He wasn't reacting blindly anymore. He was planning, calculating, and refining the strategy. Through this process, Evan discovered a new side of himself. He realized he could wield influence quietly, command respect without overt confrontation, and reclaim control without destroying trust entirely. The tension in the house became a testing ground for his patience, his intelligence, and his ability to navigate moral complexity. The desire for revenge no longer existed in a simple form. It had transformed into a careful, thoughtful plan, tempered by conscience and empathy. And yet, despite the clarity and focus, Evan could not shake the feeling that the coming confrontation, the moment when everything would be tested, was approaching. Lila's presence, her children's innocence, and his simmering anger all pointed toward an inevitable climax. He knew he would have to act, make a choice, and face the consequences of that choice. The question lingered in his mind constantly. Would revenge bring satisfaction, or would it shatter the fragile bonds that remained? Evan's nights became restless, his days alert. Every movement, every sound in the house sharpened his awareness. He analyzed behavior, anticipated reactions, and plotted potential outcomes. Yet beneath the planning and strategy, the emotional undercurrent remained. Betrayal had cut deep, and the wound demanded attention. Whether through confrontation, clever maneuvers, or silent assertion, Evan was determined to reclaim what was rightfully his, not merely his home, but his sense of order, respect, and control. By the end of this part of the story, Evan had transformed from a man shocked and hurt by betrayal into a strategist, a careful observer, and a person grappling with the moral and emotional complexity of revenge. The fire inside him burned brighter, sharper, and more controlled, setting the stage for the ultimate confrontation that would test not only his patience but his conscience and his capacity for empathy. The stage was set. Every interaction, every glance, every small act in the house was a step toward the moment of truth. Evan knew that soon, the decision would no longer be about planning or observation. It would be about choice, revenge or restraint, anger or understanding, destruction or healing. And in that choice lay the true test of character, the moment where everything would change. Evan had been watching, waiting, planning, and now the moment of truth had arrived. The tension in the house was thick, almost tangible, as if every shadow and every corner held the possibility of confrontation. Lila and her children were moving through their routines, oblivious to the storm building inside him. His heart pounded, a steady drum of anticipation, anger, and uncertainty. He had rehearsed what he would say, how he would act, every possible reaction, every consequence. Yet, standing at the edge of action, he realized that no plan could prepare him for the weight of the choice itself. It began early in the morning. The sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the living room in warm hues that contrasted sharply with the cold tension inside Evan. Lila was making breakfast, humming softly, the children laughing at some small joke she told. Evan watched, silently from the doorway, every muscle in his body tense, every thought spinning. He knew he could confront her now, demand explanations, make her feel the full measure of the violation she had caused. He could assert control in a way that left no doubt who owned the house. The temptation was powerful, magnetic, and almost irresistible. Yet as he stepped into the room, ready to speak, he noticed the subtle details, the way her shoulders slumped. Under fatigue, the faint worry lines etched across her forehead, the way the kids leaned into her for reassurance. They were innocent in all this. They had done nothing but follow their mother, trusting that she would make the right choices. Evan felt a pang of guilt. His anger had been building for days, but the innocence around him made it sharper, more complicated. Could he punish Lila without harming the children? Could he make a point without causing real damage? He took a deep breath, letting it fill his lungs and then release slowly. Words formed in his mind, sharp and precise, but when he opened his mouth, they faltered. Instead of anger, he felt a strange clarity. The house, the intrusion, the chaos, it had all led him to this moment. But now the choice wasn't just about control. It was about character. Revenge promised satisfaction. Yes, but it came at a cost. The cost was deeper than he had imagined. The possibility of broken bonds, lasting resentment, and regret that could shadow his life for years. Lila turned and saw him standing there. Her smile faltered, a flicker of fear crossing her eyes. "Evan, is everything okay?" she asked softly, her voice tentative. Evan's gaze swept over her, over the children now quiet at the table, sensing tension in the room. "No," he said finally. "Not everything is okay. But that's not what I'm here for." He paused, choosing words that were measured but firm. "We need to set things straight. Boundaries, rules, respect." She nodded quickly, relief washing over her expression, but also apprehension. I understand. I'll do whatever you need." The temptation to push further was strong. He imagined detailing every grievance, every frustration, making her understand the depth of his hurt. He imagined her guilt, her apology, her recognition of the chaos she had brought into his life. Part of him yearned for that moment, the satisfaction of having her acknowledge the wrong she had done. But then he looked at her, really looked, and the fire of anger cooled slightly. She wasn't cruel. She hadn't acted with malice. She had acted out of necessity, desperation, love for her children. That didn't erase the impact, but it reframed it. Evan realized that revenge, at its core, was about control, asserting dominance to balance an emotional ledger. But what would he gain? A temporary satisfaction, a hollow victory that left everyone worse off. His moral compass, sharpened over the last week of tension and observation, guided him to a different path. If he wanted to reclaim his home, he didn't need punishment. He needed structure, clarity, and respect. He could regain control without hurting the people he cared about. He began laying out his terms, calmly and deliberately. "You can stay," he said, watching her closely. "But things will change. Certain rooms are off limits. Certain routines must be followed. Respect this space and we can coexist. Step outside those boundaries and we'll have to reconsider." The arrangement. Layla listened intently, nodding. Her eyes were wide, her expression serious. The children leaned closer, sensing the gravity of the conversation. Evan could feel the shift in the room, the balance of power moving subtly but decisively toward fairness, rather than revenge. As the days passed, he enforced the boundaries with quiet consistency. He didn't yell. He didn't punish. He didn't humiliate. He simply acted with intention, reclaiming his space piece by piece while maintaining respect for Lila and her children. Each time he corrected a minor intrusion or reminded them of a boundary, it was done calmly, with clarity, and without anger. Slowly, the tension in the house began to ease. Leela responded with genuine effort, teaching the kids to respect spaces and routines. The chaos remained, but it became manageable, harmonious in a way that hadn't existed before. Even as he regained control, Evan's mind replayed what might have been. The scenarios where revenge was exacted, the fleeting satisfaction, the sharp satisfaction of seeing her recognize her mistakes. But he quickly recognized the hollowness of that path. Revenge would have been a temporary thrill, a momentary victory that could have caused irreparable damage. By choosing patience and structure, he had achieved something more lasting: respect, coexistence, and a renewed sense of trust. Fragile but present. Evan also noticed the subtle changes in himself. The desire for revenge, once all-consuming, had transformed into a more deliberate, thoughtful presence. He understood that power didn't need to be wielded with aggression. Control wasn't about punishment. It was about clarity, communication, and the ability to protect what mattered. And in protecting his home and his peace, he also protected his family, preserving bonds that might otherwise have been broken. One evening, as the sun set and painted the rooms in golden light, Evan watched. Leela tucked the children into bed. He felt a quiet satisfaction, not from victory over her, but from the knowledge that he had acted with integrity. The house no longer felt invaded. It felt lived in, alive and balanced. His home was his again, not through dominance, but through respect and deliberate action. And yet he didn't underestimate the lesson he had learned. Betrayal and intrusion could ignite powerful emotions. Anger could easily lead to actions one might later regret. The temptation to lash out, to punish, to take control at any cost was strong, even for someone like him. But he realized that choosing restraint, choosing strategy over impulse, and choosing respect over retaliation led to a deeper, more enduring satisfaction. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was far more meaningful. The final test came one afternoon when Lila accidentally crossed one of the boundaries he had set. He felt the familiar spark of anger, the old desire for retribution rising like a tide. But this time, he didn't react with vengeance. He addressed the issue calmly, firmly, and immediately, without drama, without blame. Leela apologized sincerely, and he accepted it. The moment crystallized everything he had learned. Revenge might give a fleeting thrill, but measured response built lasting resolution. In that instant, Evan understood the true cost and nature of revenge. It demanded energy, focus, and emotional investment, often leaving destruction in its wake. Compassion, strategy, and moral clarity, on the other hand, required strength, patience, and insight, but they built solutions rather than problems. He had chosen the latter, and in doing so, he felt a sense of empowerment he hadn't imagined possible. By the time night fell, the house was quiet again, peaceful for the first time since his return. Lila and the children slept soundly, their routines established and respected. Evan sat in the living room, surveying the space he had reclaimed without breaking anyone. He felt the deep satisfaction that comes from making difficult choices, from acting thoughtfully instead of impulsively, from winning not by defeating others, but by maintaining integrity. He reflected on the journey, the betrayal, the anger, the simmering desire for revenge, and the struggle to balance moral conscience with emotional pain. He understood that revenge might seem tempting in moments of hurt, but it rarely offered true resolution. The fleeting satisfaction it promised could never match the lasting peace that came from deliberate, principled action. In the quiet of the night, Evan felt the final weight of the story settle over him. The house, once a battleground of emotions, was now a place of coexistence. The betrayal had tested him, challenged him, and forced him to confront the darker sides of his nature. But it had also taught him patience, empathy, and the enduring power of measured, intentional action. He had faced the ultimate choice, and he had made the one that preserved not only his home, but also his family. The fire of anger that had once burned so brightly had cooled into a steady, controlled flame. It would always be there, a reminder of the intrusion and the lessons learned, but it no longer dictated his actions. Evan knew that he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable of navigating the complex, often painful world of human relationships, and, as he finally closed his eyes that night, the house silent and still, he realized the ultimate truth. Revenge might promise satisfaction, but integrity and compassion create a peace that endures far longer than any fleeting triumph ever could.